hands shake a lot these days. Parkinson's, the doctors say. But I know better. As I sit here in this veterans nursing home in Ohio, smelling of disinfectant and watching the autumn leaves drift past the window, my hands aren't shaking because of neurological degeneration. They are searching. They are reaching out for that 31-pound, cold, greasy, metallic trigger group. They are remembering that vibration, that bone-rattling recoil of 500 rounds per minute, endless and unyielding. My name is Jack Miller, a machine gunner with the 1st Marine Division. If my name sounds unremarkable, it's because in those days we were just like the weapons in our hands, standardized parts produced on an assembly line. But it was those standardized parts that formed the steel torrent that crushed the Japanese Empire. People often say the atomic bomb ended the war and aircraft carriers won the ocean. That's true. But ask a Marine who spent 3 years face down in the mud what saved his life, what truly pinned those fanatical Japanese soldiers to the ground and made it impossible for them to move an inch. He'll tell you, it was John Moses Browning's masterpiece, the M1919, a 4 air-cooled heavy machine gun, and under its muzzle, that once arrogant opponent, the one that claimed to possess the Yamato spirit, the Japanese Type 92 heavy machine gun, was ultimately reduced to a pile of scrap iron. This is a story about 2 types of metal, 2 industrial systems, and the death struggle of 2 nations' destinies on the desolate islands of the Pacific. August 1942. Guadalcanal, another name for hell. When we first landed, there seemed to be nothing but stifling humidity, rotting mud, and the jungle. But soon enough, we got to know that sound. It was a moonless, windy night near the mouth of the Tanaru River. We were digging foxholes. The jungle was terrifyingly quiet, save for the buzzing of mosquitoes. Suddenly, a strange noise drifted from the distance. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm was slow, dull, like a giant metal woodpecker hammering against a hollow tree trunk. "That's the Jap Type 92, my platoon sergeant, the seasoned Harrison, whispered. He'd served in the Philippines. "Remember that sound, Boots? They call it the woodpecker. It sounds lazy, but that thing fires a 7.7 millimeter round. One hit will tear your thigh clean off." I patted the M1919A4 beside me with a dismissal I didn't truly feel. This was my baby, my lover, my god. It wasn't high-tech. It was an air-cooled version based on the WWI-era M1917. It didn't have the clumsy water jacket, weighing in at about 31 pounds, 14 kilograms. With the tripod, it took 2, maybe 3 of us to serve it. But it was a work of art milled from solid steel, firing the same .30-06, 7.62 millimeter high-powered ammunition as the M1 rifle. That night, I witnessed the power of the woodpecker for the first time, but I also caught my first glimpse of the fatal Achilles heel of Japanese weapon design. Around 2 a.m., the Achiki detachment launched their charge. No tactical cover, just fanatical howling. The sound surged like a tsunami, then muzzle flashes lit up the opposite jungle line. The Type 92 began to roar. Thump, 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 thump. Its rate of fire was slow, about 450 rounds per minute. Honestly, to us Americans accustomed to high-speed automatic weapons, it sounded almost lethargic. The bullets struck the sandbags in front of us, kicking up clouds of dust. Its accuracy was indeed high. Rumor had it that a skilled Japanese gunner with an optical scope could snipe you from 800 meters out. But right when the Japanese charge was at its most ferocious, the woodpecker suddenly went silent. Not a pause of a few seconds, but a dead silence that lasted 6 or 7 seconds. "They're changing the feed strip," Sergeant Harrison bellowed. "Miller, light 'em up." At that moment, I didn't understand what a feed strip was. I only knew it was my chance. I squeezed the butterfly trigger of the M1919. Dat, 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 dat. In that instant, the rhythm of America rang out. The M1919's fire rate wasn't blindingly fast, 400 to 500 RPM, but it was belt-fed. That was a 250-round canvas belt. Unlike the Japanese, I didn't have to stop after 30 rounds. I could keep that trigger pinned until the barrel glowed red, until my assistant gunner, Tom, hooked up the next belt. My muzzle spat a flame half a meter long, and the .30-06 bullets swept across the river mouth like the whip of the Grim Reaper. Those Japanese soldiers, who had tried to rush us under the cover of the Type 92, instantly slammed into an invisible wall. Later, while sweeping the battlefield, I made a point to look at that captured Type 92. It looked precise, almost possessing the quality of a jagged work of art with its layered cooling fins. But then I saw the feeding mechanism beside it. It used a rigid metal strip. That was the Japanese death sentence. In the days that followed, as the war dragged on, I gained a deeper understanding of the weapons on both sides. This understanding didn't come from manuals, but from a gamble of life and death. The Japanese Type 92 heavy machine gun was designed with a philosophy stuck in World War I or even earlier. It used a 30-round metal feed strip. This meant that no matter how long the gun could theoretically fire, every 30 rounds, which is just a few seconds of shooting, the assistant gunner had to insert a new strip. Imagine this. In the pitch-black rainforest, bullets flying everywhere, your hands covered in mud and blood, and you have to accurately slide a thin metal plate into the feed slot of the gun. If your hand shakes, or if there's a bit of grit on the strip, the gun jams. That night at the Tenaru River, that Japanese gunner lost his position and his life because of that few seconds of reloading time. Contrast that with us. My M1919. Of 4/8 canvas belts, usually we had the belts neatly stacked in ammo cans. When the shooting started, Tom just had to slap the tag end of the belt into the feed tray, and I could pour out 250 rounds in one breath. In the suffocating heat and humidity of Guadalcanal, this difference in sustained firepower was magnified infinitely. The classic example was at Edson's Ridge, also known as Bloody Ridge. It was a war of attrition. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi gathered thousands of troops to retake Henderson Field. We were on the ridge, foxholes dug, guns mounted. That night was a slaughterhouse. The Japanese used their favorite wave attack. Wave after wave, climbing over the bodies of their comrades to rush us. If I had been using a Type 92, I probably would have died. Against that kind of human wave tactic covering the hillsides, you don't need precision, you don't even need range. You need a metal storm that flows like water, never stopping. "New belt," I screamed. Tom's hands were a blur. Before my barrel had even cooled, a new can was connected. My M1919 was like a tireless sewing machine, weaving a curtain of death in the dark. I watched as a group of Japanese soldiers tried to launch an assault under the cover of a Type 92. That gun was shooting accurately, even taking out a searchlight near me. But the moment it finished a strip and the Japanese assistant gunner scrambled for the next one, my M1919 seized the gap. I didn't even need to aim precisely at that machine gun. I just swept the muzzle over, blanketing the area with a density of 8 rounds per second. The canvas belt slid smoothly into the receiver, and empty brass casings ejected from the bottom like a golden fountain, piling up around my feet, heating my combat boots. By dawn, the bodies in front of our position were piled high. In some places, the corpses were stacked so deep they blocked our field of fire, and we had to risk going out to push them aside. That day, I noticed a detail next to that destroyed Type 92 that I will never forget. The Type 92's bullets were covered in oil. Yes, oil. Because the Type 92's extraction mechanism was flawed. To prevent the cartridge cases from expanding and sticking in the chamber, the Japanese had to oil every bullet or install an automatic oiler on the gun. oiling bullets on a dusty battlefield. That is suicide. Oil attracts sand and dust, turning into an abrasive paste that not only wears down the chamber, but causes frequent jams. I looked at the dead Japanese soldier next to the gun. His hands were covered in black, greasy sludge. My M1919, on the other hand, though the barrel was blue from heat and the booster was caked with carbon, remained dry and crisp, ready to roar again. This is the gap in industrial design. American designers knew the battlefield is dirty, so the M1919 used a short recoil principle with a sturdy structure and looser tolerances. It could work with a little sand in it. The Japanese designers seem to have built the Type 92 in a sterile laboratory, treating it like a precision watch. But the battlefield doesn't need a watch. It needs a hammer. After Guadalcanal, the tide began to turn. We were no longer passively defending, we were attacking. In November 1943, we arrived at Tarawa. If Guadalcanal was a jungle nightmare, Tarawa was an exposed slaughter. Badio Island was only a few square miles, but the Japanese had turned it into a fortress. Concrete pillboxes, coconut log bunkers, interlocking fields of fire. As our Amtraks, LVTS, crawled over the coral reefs, bullets hit the armor like rain. This time, the Japanese Type 92s played to their greatest strength: positional warfare. They hid the guns inside concrete bunkers with only a narrow slit, using optical scopes to precisely lock down the beach. That thump, thump, thump sound became our nightmare once again. When I jumped into chest-deep seawater carrying the M1919, I felt a heaviness like never before. Seawater flooded the cooling jacket and sand stuck to the tripod. Move! Don't stop on the beach. We were pinned down under the seawall. Every time someone tried to go over, they were knocked back by precise bursts. This is where another advantage of the M1919 appeared: portability, relatively speaking. The Type 92 heavy machine gun weighed 55 kilograms, 121 pounds, and required special carrying poles. Even that cool-looking scope was delicate. Once a position was compromised, the Japanese found it very hard to move it quickly. My M1919. A4 weighed only 31 pounds. Without the tripod, you could even carry it and hip fire. Though it burns your hands and you can't hit a damn thing, who cares when you're fighting for your life? Tom, grab the ammo. Let's flank 'em. Tom and I used a destroyed bunker for cover and crawled to the flank of the Japanese pillbox. The Type 92 inside was still firing frantically at the frontal beach. Because of its limited traverse, it couldn't turn around. I rested the M1919 on a charred coconut tree trunk. No tripod needed. I held down the barrel jacket with my left hand, wearing a thick asbestos mitten, of course, and pulled the trigger with my right. Close range. Flanking fire. Dat, 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 dat. A long stream of .30-06 bullets drilled into the bunker's firing slit. In that confined concrete space, the bullets would ricochet and bounce, shredding everything inside. The sound of the Type 92 stopped abruptly. For a week in Tarawa, we repeated this tactic. Infantry used flamethrowers and satchel charges to clear the way, and we machine gunners followed closely with the M1919s, moving quickly between bunkers, establishing temporary fire points to suppress Japanese counterattacks. In this process, I saw the desperation of Japanese industry. When clearing the battlefield, we found many Type 92s were not destroyed, but beside them were piles of empty feed strip boxes. In other bunkers, although there was ammunition, the guns had been abandoned due to failures of the complex oiler mechanism or sand jams. What shocked me even more were the captured supplies. On Tarawa, we saw mountains of spare M1919 barrels and thousands of crates of .30-06 ammo. On the Japanese side, their Type 92s were well made, but pitifully few in number. Later, I learned the desperate statistic. During the entire war, the United States produced about 390,000 M1919 series machine guns. And Japan? Their total production of Type 92 heavy machine guns was only about 45,000. That is a gap of nearly 9 to 1. What did that mean? It meant that at Tarawa, if we lost a machine gun, the supply sergeant would immediately toss me a new one, still smelling of factory grease. When the Japanese lost a Type 92, it was a permanent loss. Once a gap appeared in their line, there was no metal left to fill it. On the last day in Tarawa, I sat atop a blown-out Japanese command post, cleaning my M1919. The finish was worn, but that only made the action smoother. Out on the sea, the American transport fleet covered the horizon, cranes hoisting endless supply crates ashore. There were more M1919, more M1, more Sherman tanks, and beneath my feet in this scorched earth lay thousands of elite Japanese troops, buried with their exquisite but fragile, craft-like Type 92 machine guns. I realized this wasn't just a duel between two guns. This was the Detroit assembly line versus a Tokyo workshop. It was a kind of hopelessness. For the Japanese, their defeat was written the moment the first rivet was driven. But the war wasn't over. Crueler battles lay ahead. In Saipan, in Peleliu, the Japanese would become even crazier, and our M1919s would face even sterner tests. June 1944. Mariana Islands, Saipan. When we climbed up to that open stretch known as Death Valley, I realized the war had changed. In the early island fights, we faced ghosts of the jungle. Here, we faced a regular, massive army that had been backed into a corner like a trapped beast. My M1919. A 4 was no longer the original one. After Tarawa, the rifling was so shot out that the armorer swapped it for a brand new one without a word. Serial number 71489. I carved a name into it. Betty, the name of that girl back home who loved to dance. But that night on Saipan, Betty didn't dance. She roared. It was the early morning of July 7th, the largest banzai charge of the Pacific War. General Saito had issued the final order for Gyokusai, shattered jewel. That's what we heard in the intel. At 0400, the earth began to tremble. Not artillery, but footsteps. 3,000, 4,000, maybe more. The remnants of the Japanese army, even including wounded men on crutches, waving bayonets, grenades, even sharpened bamboo spears, surged toward us like a dam breaking. Flares! The sky was instantly bleached white by magnesium light. In that moment, I saw a sight that would give me nightmares for life. A dense mass of people running tirelessly like zombies, eyes empty and fanatical. And behind them, the Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns began to provide covering fire. Thump, 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 thump. That familiar, slow rhythm rang out again. But in the face of a charge of thousands, the Type 92's rate of fire seemed so feeble. It tried to suppress us, tried to tear a hole for the infantry. "Betty, time to work," I yelled. Tom and I had dug our foxhole early. The M1919 was locked on the tripod, the T&E, traverse and elevation mechanism locked onto the main field of fire ahead. I pulled the trigger and didn't let go. Dat, 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 dat. The M1919's muzzle jumped wildly, the 250-round canvas belt feeding into the receiver like a greedy snake. My vision was filled only with muzzle flash and dark shapes falling in the distance. On my left, another M1919 was roaring. On my right, 2 BAR automatic rifles were firing bursts. We formed a crossfire. This is the core of machine gun tactics. You aren't aiming at a person, you are weaving a web of death. Anything that hits that web gets shredded. Just then, I heard something wrong with the opposing Type 92. It fired about a dozen shots, then stopped abruptly. That wasn't a tactical pause. That was a malfunction. I learned later that it was drizzling on Saipan that night, the air thick with humidity mixed with volcanic ash and dirt. The Type 92's unique oiler mechanism became its death warrant in that moment. To lubricate the bullets, the oil pump coated every round, and in that chaotic, muddy environment, the oil absorbed the volcanic ash from the air, turning into a sticky, abrasive paste. It jammed. At the critical moment when the Japanese charge needed covering fire the most, their heavy machine gun went silent. And my M1919? The barrel was glowing red. The receiver was so hot I could feel the heat radiating even through my thick mitts. "Change barrel," I yelled. But in combat, that's impossible. The M1919A4 allows for barrel changes, but it takes time and you have to stand up to do it. Standing up in a rain of grenades is suicide. "No time! Water!" Tom pulled out his canteen and poured cold water directly onto the glowing barrel jacket. Hiss! White steam erupted with a shriek, blinding me for a second. The metal groaned under the thermal shock. It might ruin the rifling, it might crack the barrel, but I didn't care. I pulled the trigger again. It still banged. It didn't jam. This is the rugged aesthetic of American steel. It doesn't need delicate care. It just needs you to feed it bullets, cool it down with dirty water, and it will keep killing. That night, along with 2 other machine guns, we fired nearly 10,000 rounds. When the sun came up, the bodies in front of the position were piled like a small hill. Behind the pile of corpses, we found that silent Type 92. Its bolt was stuck halfway, a deformed cartridge jammed in the chamber, the feed strip twisted. The Japanese gunner lay dead beside it, clutching a cleaning rod, obviously trying to fix it before he died. Looking at that complex feeding mechanism, I couldn't help but sneer. That thing might be a fine gun on a shooting range, but in hell, it was a piece of junk. As the front line pushed toward the Japanese homeland, I thought more deeply about the generation gap between the weapons. It wasn't just a gun issue. It was a collision of national industrial logic. During downtime, we often gathered to discuss captured weapons. The Type 92 heavy machine gun, theoretical rate of fire 450 RPM, actual combat rate of fire maybe 200 RPM. Why? Because of that damn 30-round feed strip. Imagine the math. To sustain 1 minute of suppressive fire, the Japanese assistant gunner needs to load a strip at least 7 or 8 times. Every reload is an interruption. Every interruption is a gap in firepower, and during every gap, our Marine infantry can advance 10 meters. Furthermore, that feed strip is rigid. In a narrow foxhole, when the strip feeds out the right side of the gun, it often hits the wall of the hole or sandbags, causing a failure to feed. Contrast that with us. M1919. A4 canvas belt, 250 rounds a box. To finish these 250 rounds, I just need to hold the trigger for about 30 seconds if I'm not afraid of melting the barrel. Within those 30 seconds, the firepower is absolutely continuous. No breaks, no breathing room. What does this mean? It means I can execute overhead fire and suppressive fire. I can lock down an intersection for a long time, turning it into an absolute kill zone. The Japanese can't pass, can't look up, can't even reposition. In a mop-up operation, we encountered a squad of Japanese hiding behind rocks. They had a Type 92. We didn't call for mortars. The captain just pointed to the spot. "Miller, pin 'em down." I started shooting. Not short bursts, but long bursts of about 100 rounds a minute, a rhythm I could sustain for a long time. The Japanese gunner tried to return fire. He finished one strip, thump, thump, thump. Pause. In those few seconds of silence, my bullets pulverized the rock in front of him, keeping his head down. Just as he fumbled to load the next strip and tried to peek out, my next wave of lead arrived. I suppressed him like that for 10 solid minutes. For 10 minutes, his Type 92 was there, but effectively useless. He couldn't aim, couldn't fire continuously, and could only fire wild shots in the gaps of my shooting. Finally, our flamethrower man flanked him. A scream, a puff of black smoke. "Fight over." This is the victory of the belt over the strip. This is the victory of the assembly line over the craftsman spirit. The Japanese gun was designed too precisely, so precise it couldn't tolerate a grain of sand. Our gun was built to tractor standards. It knew how to work in the mud. September 1944. Peleliu. If the previous battles were fought on a plain, then in Peleliu, war became a three-dimensional nightmare. Japanese commander Colonel Kunio Nakagawa changed tactics. He stopped the foolish banzai charges. He hollowed out this coral island, turning it into a honeycomb of underground fortifications. Here, the role of the M1919A4 shifted dramatically. We were no longer just killing weapons, we became corks. Every cave mouth, every crack in the rock could spit fire. The Japanese hid deep inside, the Type 92s mounted behind incredibly concealed firing slits, showing only a tiny muzzle. Here, we felt the crushing advantage of production volume again. At the famous Bloody Nose Ridge, we met stiff resistance. The Japanese firing points were tricky. If we wanted to take a hill, we often had to pay a huge price in casualties. But we had bullets. Logistics was simply insane. 30-6 ammo crates were stacked like pyramids on the beach. As long as my ammo can was empty, even in the middle of a fight, I just had to yell "ammo," and a carrier would toss me 2 boxes like bricks. We adopted an extremely extravagant tactic: blind suppression. Even if I couldn't see the Japanese, as long as I felt there might be someone behind that rock or that dark cave mouth looked suspicious, I would feed a whole 250-round belt into it. "Don't save ammo, the government's buying." That was the phrase always on the platoon sergeant's lips. Across the lines, life for the Japanese was getting harder. When we captured caves, we found less and less ammo next to the Type 92s. Those exquisite brass-cased bullets were disappearing one by one. Later, we even found Japanese bodies beside machine guns loaded with partially filled strips. They had picked up scattered loose rounds from the floor and manually pressed them back into the metal strips. Can you imagine that desperation? Outside, American bullets are pouring like water. Thousands of rounds a minute hitting the cave mouth, rock chips flying, and inside the dark cave, with shaking hands, you are pressing bloody, muddy bullets one by one into that damn strip. Once, in a blasted-out cave, we found a field diary belonging to a Japanese machine gunner. An intelligence officer who knew Japanese read it to us. September 25th, the enemy fire is too fierce. Their machine guns seem to never need rest. Never need reloading. That sound is like the laughter of demons all night long. My Type 92 jammed 3 times today. No oil left, I had to use hair oil. But I only have 2 strips of bullets left. For the Emperor, I must wait for a sure shot. Listening to this, I touched the M1919 beside me. The blued finish was worn off, revealing the silver-gray base metal, the tripod covered in scratches. It looked ugly, dirty, like a dock worker covered in grease, but it never stopped working. In that meat grinder of Peleliu, we used tons of steel to grind the Japanese into powder right inside the rocks. This wasn't a victory of tactics, it was a victory of materiel. It was the smokestacks of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland, crushing the Japanese handicraft workshops. It was in Peleliu that I first heard a staggering number. US M1919 production had surpassed 300,000 units. 300,000. When I looked at that number, I imagined lining up 300,000 machine guns, a great wall of steel stretching from Tokyo to Washington. And the Japanese? It was said all their machine guns combined didn't even equal a fraction of ours. And with that pitiful quantity, they were constantly losing them to jams, lack of oil, and bent feed strips. The war was actually already over. The Japanese just hadn't realized yet that they were using their teeth to gnaw on a steamroller running at full speed. But the steamroller wouldn't stop. Next stop, Iwo Jima. Black sand and deeper despair awaited us there. February 1945, Iwo Jima. If you haven't been there, you can never imagine the color. It's not normal sand. It's crushed volcanic slag, black, coarse, like millions of tiny coal cinders. When we hit Red Beach 1, my boots sank deep into that soft black sand. I couldn't run. It was like running in a nightmare, legs filled with lead, while the Reaper watched you from the top of Mount Suribachi. The fighting here was different. Japanese commander Tadamichi Kuribayashi was a devil of a tactician. He didn't fight on the beach. He hid 20,000 troops underground. This time, my old partner, that M1919 with the blackened barrel, faced the greatest challenge of its life: volcanic ash. This black ash got into everything. It got into our collars, into our spam cans, and of course, into the receiver. The last cry of the woodpecker. On the third day after landing, we were bogged down near airfield number 2. A Japanese heavy fire point blocked our advance. It was a cluster of concrete-reinforced semi-underground bunkers supporting each other. I heard that familiar sound. Thump, 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 thump. It was the Type 92, but this time it sounded wrong, like an asthmatic old man, intermittent, full of hesitation. This was the consequence of the oiler mechanism I mentioned earlier. To ensure smooth extraction, the Type 92 had to oil every bullet. In the humid jungle of Guadalcanal, it was a nuisance. In the mud of Saipan, it was a disaster. But in the flying volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, it was suicide. Oil plus volcanic ash equals heavy-duty grinding paste. Lying in a shell crater, I watched through binoculars. I could see the tongue of flame from the bunker's firing slit suddenly cut out. "They jammed!" Tom yelled, his face covered in black soot, only the whites of his eyes visible. I knew what happened. The Japanese gunner's feed strip was definitely covered in black sand. When those oil-coated bullets were fed into the chamber, the sand went in with them. After a few rounds, the bolt would be seized solid, or the casing would rip apart in the chamber due to excessive friction. "Our turn!" I racked the bolt of the M1919. My gun had sand in it too. It was unavoidable. But the M1919's design was crude. John Browning was like a blacksmith who understood human suffering. He left enough tolerance in the mechanism. Those tiny grains of sand would be crushed by the powerful recoil spring or shaken out of the receiver by the violent recoil. I pulled the trigger. Dat, 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 dat. The M1919 roared. In that moment, I didn't need to worry about it going on strike because of a few grains of sand. The 250-round canvas belt was dusty, sure, but it didn't need oil. The dry bullets forced their way into the chamber. It might wear the barrel down fast, but it banged, it fired, it killed. My bullets splashed against that silent bunker like rain. Concrete chips flew. I didn't need to hit the Japanese soldier in the slit precisely. I just needed to use 500 rounds a minute to seal that hole shut, so they couldn't even lift their heads. Minutes later, a Sherman Zippo flamethrower tank struggled up from the beach and rolled up to the bunker. A dragon of orange fire surged out, drilling into the fortification. The screams drowned out even the explosions on the battlefield. When we cleared the area, I crawled into that bunker, smelling of roast meat and sulfur. The Type 92 heavy machine gun was still there, sitting majestically on its tripod. But when I opened the receiver, it was full of black sludge. That sticky mixture had gummed up the precise locking mechanism completely. Beside the dead Japanese gunner lay cleaning rods and oil cans. In the moment of life and death, he wasn't fighting. He was fixing his gun. What irony. Japanese engineers pursued ultimate precision, designing a feeding mechanism as complex as a clock, but forgot that the battlefield is the dirtiest, messiest, most unreasonable place on Earth. And our M1919 was like a rough iron hammer. Whether in a mud pit or volcanic ash, it could drive the nail in. April 1945, Okinawa. If Iwo Jima was a dry black sand hell, Okinawa was a soaking wet red swamp. The famous plum rain season combined with millions of artillery shells churned the island into a mud pit. Here, facing the Shuri line, constructed by General Mitsuru Ushijima, we witnessed what absolute firepower dominance really meant. By this time, the nature of the war had changed completely. This wasn't combat, this was demolition. In the fight for Sugarloaf Hill, Japanese resistance reached a fever pitch. They used reverse-slope defenses, combining mortars and Type 92s in crossfire. But by now, the U.S. military possessed suffocating material superiority. Next to my M1919, there weren't just a few ammo cans anymore. There were walls of them. Logistics trucks dumped tons of ammo directly behind the company. "Miller, pour it on, don't stop, level that hill." The platoon leader's order was simple and brutal. We used the talking guns tactic. I was grouped with 2 other machine guns. I fired 200 rounds, then stopped to cool the barrel while the second gun picked up, then the third. This way, our fire never ceased. Opposite us, the Japanese Type 92s seemed increasingly lonely and desolate. From captured documents, we learned that Japanese logistics had completely collapsed. Every 7.7mm round was priceless to them. Their gunners dared not spray bullets like we did. They could only fire short bursts. This led to a fatal tactical consequence. We completely suppressed them. I had infinite bullets for recon by fire. That bush looks wrong? Give it a burst. Shadows in that rock crevice? Give it a burst. The Japanese dared not return fire because firing meant revealing their position, and revealing their position meant attracting endless bullet rain, bazooka rockets, or even naval bombardment. One night, the Japanese launched an infiltration attack. In the heavy rain, visibility was terrible. Before, I would have been nervous, but now, I just clamped down on the trigger. Tom and I worked flawlessly together. He loaded belts expertly in the rain. Rainwater streamed down the M1919's receiver, mixing with gun oil and powder residue, but the old gun worked happily. Dat, 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 dat. We formed an impassable firewall in front of the position. Anything trying to pass through was shredded. At dawn, we found a dozen Japanese bodies in front of the line. They were carrying bamboo spears. Look at it. This was the scene at the end of the war. On one side, cannon fodder holding bamboo spears, struggling for the last gasp of fascist militarism. On the other, an industrial beast pouring out hundreds and thousands of steel bullets every minute. This gap wasn't just a generation gap in weapons. It was the gap between civilization and barbarism, between modern industry and feudal fanaticism. With the end of the Okinawa campaign, we finally had time to sit down, look at the mountains of captured weapons, and think about the essence of this war. Throughout the Pacific War, there was a number regarding the comparison of these 2 machine guns that always haunted me. Later, I saw the authoritative statistics in a veterans magazine, U.S. Browning M1919 series, total production, approx. 390,000 units. Japanese, Type 92 heavy machine gun, total production, approximately 45,000 units, a gap of nearly 9 times. But was it just quantity? No, it represented 2 completely different logics of war. The Japanese logic, the craftsman's elegy. The Type 92 heavy machine gun was a work of art. Its cooling fins were machined perfectly, its optical scope was crystal clear, its tolerances were minimal. Every part looked hand-polished, but it was this craftsman spirit that killed them. Because manufacturing was too complex, production couldn't scale up. Because tolerances were too tight, a little sand caused jams. Because of design flaws, extraction issues, they added a complex oiler, further reducing reliability. Because it used 30-round feed strips, sustained firepower was terrible. It was like the Japanese brought an expensive violin to the battlefield, while we brought an electric guitar. On the battlefield, when a Type 92 broke, the Japanese often couldn't fix it because parts weren't interchangeable. A hand-fitted part from one gun might not fit into another, so we often saw Japanese soldiers dying while clutching broken machine guns. The American logic, the violence of the assembly line. And my M1919. It was a product of the Detroit assembly line. It looked rough, maybe even ugly. Its receiver was just steel plates riveted together, but its parts were completely interchangeable. My firing pin broke? Strip one from that destroyed gun over there, drop it in, and it works. More importantly, what did that production of 390,000 units mean? It meant that late in the war, we could equip every platoon, every squad, maybe even every fire team with heavy firepower. We didn't need to hoard machine guns like treasures the way the Japanese did. If my barrel was shot out, I didn't need to desperately scrub it with a rod like that Japanese soldier. I would throw the barrel away and swap in a new one. Hell, if things were urgent, I'd throw the whole gun away because I knew that in the hold of a Liberty ship, there were 1,000 new ones waiting for me. This is the power of industrialization. It didn't just defeat the Japanese, it drowned them. Drowned in a torrent of steel, drowned in the smoke of sulfur, drowned under endless belts of ammunition. The war ended. Atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was power on another level, but for those of us crawling in the mud, that was a distant story. Our story was about every inch of blood-soaked beach, every flame-scorched bunker. Now, sitting in my wheelchair at the nursing home, watching the peaceful sunlight outside, my grandson often asks me, "Grandpa, how did you beat the Japanese? Didn't they have Bushido spirit? Weren't they unafraid of death?" I look at my constantly shaking hands, the lasting legacy of enduring machine gun recoil. I tell him, "Son, being unafraid of death doesn't win wars." The so-called Gyokusai, honorable death, these 7 lives for the country that the Japanese preached in the face of true industrial power, it was nothing but a pathetic delusion. They drove thousands of young men, just your age, to take flawed weapons and fight against a modern nation armed to the teeth with steel. The tragedy of the Type 92 heavy machine gun is the microcosm of the Japanese Empire. It looked fierce and precise, but it was rigid and fragile, unable to withstand the test of reality. The M1919, however, represented the values we uphold: pragmatic, reliable, powerful, and respectful of life. We covered the battlefield with steel so that fewer American kids had to fight with bayonets. I still remember the last day on Okinawa. We stood on the ruins of Shuri Castle. My M1919 was propped on a broken stone stele, the muzzle dipping slightly, still smoking. Under my feet was a mountain of brass casings, glittering in the sun. Opposite us, the Japanese lines were dead silent. No more banzai charges, no more thump-thump-thump of the machine guns. In that moment, I knew we hadn't just won a battle. We had taken an anti-human, insane fascist system and smashed it to pieces with the hardest steel we had. Those once arrogant Type 92 machine guns are now either gathering dust in museums or have been melted down into rebar to build a peaceful world. And my M1919, that old partner who walked with me through Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, it fulfilled its mission. It proved that justice needs more than noble declarations. It needs a big stick in its hand that never jams.